My name is Eliza Vangard, and I have been practicing psychotherapy for over 15 years. Long enough to know that patients are patients no matter where they are, that they are complicated and resistant and inventive in ways adults often forget. But last fall, I moved to the Pacific Northwest to take a new position and found myself in charge of a group of adolescent clients at Lighthouse Behavioral Rehabilitation Center, an aging facility tucked deep in the inner city where fog and urban smog often mingled even at noon. My clients, unlike any I had worked with before, not dangerous or delinquent, just different and perhaps too watchful, able to laugh and scream in the courtyard one moment, then fall into eerie silence the next. Those chilling pauses making me stop and listen. And it was in one of those silences that I noticed their ritual. At first thinking it was just a variant of hide and seek or a regional nursery rhyme, as they formed a loose circle in the tiled yard, walking slowly around a chosen person while murmuring a rhythm of names. The one in the center provoking and tricking the others into saying their full names, and anyone who slipped becoming it. The rules, not strange, but the way they treated the game with solemn reverence, unsettling. The ritual always beginning the same with whispers, measured steps, and a nervous kind of worship as city noise dulled when the circle formed and the chosen it never acting like they were playing. No laughter or eye-rolling or chasing, only hunched shoulders and downcast eyes and sometimes even tears. And though I told myself it was just performance to make the role less desirable, it still left a sour taste. And sometimes they tested me singing, "What's your name, Miss Vangard?" with grins. But I held the boundary as I always had, insisting, "I'm Miss Vangard to you, nothing more." And their attempts faded as they returned to their circle, whispering until that Tuesday when everything changed during a difficult week of gray skies and restless patience. When I saw them form the circle again with Lucas at the center. A boy I knew well who had troubles at home, inconsistent attendance, a father drifting in and out of his life, a mother working 2 jobs, a boy I worked with individually praising every small win. And now he stood there with the others around him chanting low and firm while he bowed his head and clenched his fists, not sulking but terrified. The pallor around his mouth and the tremble in his shoulders making him look hollow as if something had scooped him out and left only fear. And as I stepped closer, I could swear his lips moved in a whisper, not to the others or himself, but to something else. And when the bell ended free time, I stopped him before he could slip away, guiding him to a bench by the chain-link fence where he sat clutching his backpack like a shield. And I told him he looked upset and the game didn't seem fun for him. But he stared at the gravel saying, "It's just a game," until he finally whispered that it was a rule and that they weren't allowed to tell because if they did, I would be part of the game. But when I told him he could tell me, he curled inward looking far older than his age, exhausted as though he had seen too much. And when I told him the game should be fun, and he didn't look like he was having fun, he only said I couldn't help. The resignation in his voice hitting me harder than expected. And for the rest of the afternoon, I kept glancing at him as he half-heartedly filled out worksheets, his eyes distant. And during snack time, I tried asking the group casually about the name game, the room falling silent instantly until Serena murmured without looking up, "If you don't pass it on, it stays," earning sharp warnings from the others and refusing to elaborate. And when I asked, "Pass what?" no one answered, their tension thick, the words echoing in my mind all afternoon as Lucas sat pale and slow, looking not teased but burdened by something he couldn't set down. And by the time the bell rang, I had made my decision that I had finished part 1 of the story, including the introduction to Lighthouse, the strange ritual, and the pivotal conversation with Lucas that led to Miss Vangard's choice to break her own principle. I had never participated in any of their games before, never blurred the line between Miss Vangard, the authoritative therapist, and the adolescent clients. But seeing Lucas like that, knowing he was carrying something he believed he could not share, gnawed at me. And if joining their ritual could give me perspective to help these kids, then loosening a boundary seemed worth it. So the next day, during free activity, when the circle formed and the murmuring began, I stepped closer, and Lucas's eyes widened as I knelt beside him, saying softly, "I mean it. Can I play this time?" And the other patients froze mid-step, faces pale, 24 children staring as though I had broken an unspoken rule. Serena whispering, "Professionals don't play," in a horrified tone. And when I asked why not and joked lightly that maybe I'd be better at it than they thought, Lucas's face pulled between fear and hope. And for the first time in weeks, his shoulders lifted a little as he murmured that I could play, but only if I did it properly. And when I asked how, he said I had to say my full name. The whole circle flinching as a boy hissed, and another tugged his sleeve to stop him. But Lucas stood firm, saying it didn't count otherwise. And I hesitated because 15 years of therapy work had taught me the power of boundaries, and my given name was one I had never shared, a line I had never crossed because I was always Miss Vangard. Yet Lucas was smiling now, a fragile, real smile. So I whispered, just this once, leaned in and said my full name, Eliza Vangard. And the change was instant as the circle erupted in motion, their voices rising into a sudden chant, their faces pale and fixed on me as names swirled in a feverish rhythm. The children walking around me while Lucas staggered back with relief, washing over him like sunrise, laughing sharply before covering his mouth, color returning to his face, eyes bright as though something invisible had slipped from his shoulders onto mine. And I realized this was not shared amusement, but liberation, because I had taken something from him that he was ecstatic to lose. And when the bell rang, the ritual ended as they dispersed, chattering as though nothing had happened, except for Lucas, who lingered to mumble, "Thank you, Miss Vangard," before hurrying away. And for the rest of the afternoon, I basked in that warmth as he brightened, raising his hand twice during reading group and volunteering to help collect worksheets. His lightness making my unease feel worth it, making me think maybe the ritual was just a strange game and my participation had simply given him the break he needed. Maybe, until that night when doubt began, when I was grading psychological reports in my apartment's silence and heard it for the first time. Faint, unclear, my pen freezing mid-stroke as someone whispered, "Vangard," and then Eliza Vangard, drifting not from the kitchen, but through it like a cold draft through walls, a whisper as if someone leaned close behind my ear without breath or body. And I searched every room, found nothing, windows locked, door latched, silence. But when I returned to my desk, the reports were scattered and rearranged deliberately. My name scrawled across them in faint, uneven strokes written again and again by unseen hands. And I shoved them into the drawer and sat in the dark with my pulse hammering as another whisper rose from the corner beyond the lamp's glow, saying Eliza Vangard. And I did not sleep, because every time I closed my eyes, it repeated patiently, endlessly, as though something had finally learned what it needed. And the whispers did not stop, never loud but always present, sliding through the cracks of my apartment at night, curling under the refrigerator's hum, murmuring from the dark corners of my bedroom, always my full name, patient and relentless, wrong in a way that made the world tilt. And at the center it followed me, disrupting therapy sessions, making me stumble over roll call as the patients exchanged glances and whispered, "She's it now," and the collector's with her, while the relief on Lucas's face was deeper than any accusation, his smile fuller than I had ever seen because he was free. And that was when I understood that the ritual was not cruelty or bullying, but survival, a ceremony not for fun, but to pass on the burden before it hollowed them out. And now it was mine. and I had finished part 2 of the story, describing Miss Vangard's intervention, the moment she took the burden by saying her full name, the beginning of the horrifying whispers, and the terrible realization of the ritual's true purpose. On the 3rd day, the headaches began. Not normal ones, but a constant pressure at the base of my skull as if a hand were pressed there without ever letting go. And sleep came only in fragments, half an hour at a time, before the whispers woke me. And in the therapy room, I caught myself murmuring. Not sentences, not lessons, but only my own name over and over. My lips moving silently until I realized what I was doing. And each time I slipped, the room seemed to dim, as though something had leaned in closer to listen. And the patients noticed before I admitted it to myself, amused at first, as I stumbled through group activities, forgot topic lists, let schedules drift, so free periods stretched and games replaced counseling. Laughter ringing through the halls, wild and unburdened. But the fun soured quickly into fear. And by week's end, my hands shook as I wrote on the whiteboard. My eyes raw and heavy with exhaustion, dark crescents blooming underneath. And once mid-sentence, my mind went blank, and a boy had to supply the answer. Laughter gone silent, replaced by worry, as I lifted my gaze from grading to find 20 wide, uncertain eyes on me. Even Lucas avoiding my gaze. Relief still on his face, but also guilt, because he knew what I carried now. And by Friday, I could barely hold the chalk, leaning on the desk as the room spun, and my words broke apart in my mouth. Students frozen, sports balls untouched, pencils still, no more celebration. And when the bell rang, they left slowly, whispering, while I held my head in my hands, trying not to mumble my own name. And that was when I found a folded note tucked beneath my notebook in small, careful pencil. Don't keep it too long. It hurts. Unsigned, only a warning. The temptation of passing it on. By the 2nd week, I began considering it, the thought threading itself through my mind during roll call as I read names in order, Carter, Diaz, Huang, with each child answering present without hesitation. But what if I pushed a little, paused at one name, pretended to mispronounce it, waited until they corrected me, not just the first name, but the full one drawn out clearly. Their full name, the ritual would recognize it, the collector would shift to them. And I imagined it again during writing time, insisting on formality, asking them to read their full name aloud as a therapeutic requirement they would never question. The burden sliding from me to them as it always had, the images nauseating yet persistent. But when I looked up at their faces, I saw not mischief or teasing but worry, eyes flicking to my trembling hands and pale skin and stumbling speech, their concern striking harder than the whispers. And I dropped the papers, croaking, "Go free, period!" And they scattered too quickly, relief obvious. And in the sudden quiet, I heard a murmur by the window, not carried by wind, as Serena lingered tugging at her bag strap, not meeting my eyes as she whispered, "You can't keep it. It gets worse if you do." And when I asked how, she only shook her head, saying they didn't know because no one had ever lasted this long. And that night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while whispers filled every shadow, pressing against my ears and throat and the corners of the room. And for the first time, I thought of outsiders. A colleague, a clerk, my sister if I called her, anyone who could take it, anyone who wouldn't know how it worked. But the thought collapsed almost instantly because they didn't know the rules or the ritual or how to pass it on. What if they kept it forever? What if it destroyed them? And worse, they would know who had given it to them. And I pressed my palms to my eyes until sparks bloomed while my own lips muttered my name again and again unbidden. And from the corner of the room, the collector stirred, unseen but felt, leaning in to listen. And I clenched my jaw against the truth. The longer I held it, the closer I came to a place no child had ever survived. the collector's horrifying presence. It did not take weeks for things to worsen, only days. The headache sinking into nausea, my hands shaking so hard I held the chalk with both, laughter gone from the patients who now watched me with frightened pity. And then I began to see it, first at the edges of my vision. A pale, contorted shape waiting at the end of distant halls, vanishing whenever I turned. Tricks of exhaustion, I told myself. Nerves frayed, but by Thursday it no longer stayed at the periphery, because during a vocabulary exercise, I glanced to the back of the therapy room and froze as it stood between the back row seats. Too tall, with shoulders brushing the ceiling. A body too thin for its height. Limbs bent at angles that implied too many joints. And where a face should be was only a cavernous black shimmer, like something hollowed out from within. And the worst part was not its form, but the fact that the students did not react. Their pencils scratching calmly as though nothing loomed above them, as though I alone could see it. And my throat locked, a whisper of my own name trying to escape before I clenched my teeth until they clicked. And the thing tilted its head, that hollow space rippling and stretching, and I lurched against the desk. "Miss Vangard?" a girl whispered. The room silent now. 20 pencils paused, 20 terrified faces staring at me. And in that silence, I thought, better me than them. Because if I passed it on, if one of these children slipped and saw what I saw, it would hollow them out, break them, and I could not do that to them, not any of them. And my vision blurred as the room tilted, and for a dreadful moment, I thought I would collapse right there, letting it take me in front of them. But the whisper eased just enough for me to steady myself, gripping the table until my knuckles whitened. And the students did not move because they knew what was happening and knew I had not passed it on. None speaking as I picked up the chalk, my hand shaking so badly the word I wrote was unreadable. And then, mid-sentence, everything went black. Only for a breath, a blink. But long enough that when I opened my eyes, all 20 children were staring in perfect silence, knowing I was falling apart. And I had finished part 3 of the story, detailing Miss Vangard's physical collapse, the revolting temptation to pass the burden on, and the culmination in the appearance of the collector seen only by her. The therapy room emptied in a rush of coats and backpacks, conversation fading down the hallway, and I remained at my desk staring at the blank whiteboard, the chalk still trembling in my hand, my body feeling like wet paper, fragile and sagging under its own weight. And I almost didn't notice the girl, a quiet child, small for her age, standing in the doorway, twisting the strap of her bag. And when I looked up, she met my eyes with a steadiness that startled me. Not fear or mischief, but something older. And she said softly, "You can't keep it forever," freezing me in place before she stepped into the room and said, "Play with me." And my stomach tightened as I whispered, "No," harsher than I meant. But she didn't move, her gaze fixed on me as she said, "You'll break. You're already breaking. It's not supposed to stay with one person this long." And I shook my head as heat gathered behind my eyes because she didn't know what it felt like. She didn't know what I'd seen, but she answered with unwavering calm. "I know enough. All of us do." And silence stretched between us while I thought about Lucas's relief. The instant he felt lighter the moment I took the burden, the note tucked into my paperwork. "Don't keep it too long. It hurts." And I knew she was right, even though the thought of passing the burden to a child tore at me. And I gripped the desk, fighting the words as I whispered, "You're just a kid." And she gave a small, sad smile and said, "We all are." And I nearly chose the easy path so many times, opening my mouth to ask her or any of the others for their full name, because it would have been reasonable, they wouldn't refuse. But when I looked into her eyes, resigned and brave, I saw the collector looming behind her, the hollow, shimmering cavity where a face should have been. And I saw what it would carve out of her, how it would hollow her smile. And I understood that the burden was not just discomfort, but a slow spiritual death, So I bit my lip until I tasted blood and whispered, "Better me," then said louder, "No, I won't play with you." And she accepted this with patient understanding, stepping aside to stand by the window looking out at the damp courtyard where the ritual circle once formed, while I sat another half hour battling nausea and whispers that merged now into a relentless chant of Eliza Vangard, Catherine Vangard, Vangard. And I remembered something another boy had told me earlier in the week, a child who had held it too long the year before. How he said he eventually wanted to pass it on, not to escape it, but because he couldn't bear the thought of someone not taking it, describing the burden as a terrible loneliness. And I understood. Because if no one would take it, you were alone with something you knew was devastating. And passing it became the only mercy you could give, even if it felt like betrayal. And I looked at Serena still waiting and realized that I couldn't save them from the ritual or break the rules, but I could change how the rules were followed because I was the adult, the authority, and that meant something. So I made my choice and stood with steady hands and a strange calm as I called Serena, and she turned with a blank face while I said, "You're right. I can't keep it forever, but I also can't give it to you," walking toward her and placing my hand on her shoulder as I continued. "The rule is that it must be passed, and I will follow that rule, but not now." And I met her eyes with all the resolve I had left as I said, "I'll keep it one more night. I'll lighten it as much as I can, and tomorrow I'll find someone to pass it to, but not anyone here." And she frowned and whispered, "You can't, it'll be worse." But I answered, "I have to try. I broke the boundaries of a therapist. Now I have to follow the boundaries of a bearer." And I sent her out and locked the door, returning to the center of the room where the collector had lingered hours earlier, closing my eyes as the whispers surged sharper and more insistent. Eliza Catherine Vangard. Her name is Eliza Vangard. And instead of resisting, I absorbed it, let it press into me because I had carried it for a week and no child could bear it longer. And though this was not the burden I had been trained to carry, it was mine now, and I could not hold it forever. No one could, but I could buy time, endure one more day so these children could have one more day without the weight crushing them. And that was my final choice, to use my role as the adult to intervene in the vicious cycle by willingly becoming the rotating bearer. And I opened my eyes to the hollow space where I knew the collector had stood. My vision still blurred and my head burning, but my resolve clear, because I needed to find a recipient outside the circle, an adult, someone not among these children. And I needed to do it before I completely collapsed, before I hollowed out and became something like the collector. And I had completed part 4 of the story, ending with Miss Vangard's sacrificial decision to keep the burden to protect the children and accept her role as the rotating bearer. Here is your text rewritten in English exactly as given, with no additions, no removals, and no line breaks. The next morning, I woke up from a short, restless sleep, feeling worse than ever. My body was exhausted, every movement a pain. The whispers never stopped, my name repeating in my mind, turning silence into an extended agony. I arrived early at the Lighthouse Rehabilitation Center. Patients began to arrive, and I saw them avoiding me more than usual. They weren't afraid of me, but of the thing that was with me. During the free morning activity, I decided to carry out my plan, find an external recipient, perhaps a newly hired maintenance worker who didn't yet know the strange rules of the center. As I walked into the common area, I saw the circle already formed. No sounds, no murmuring. Serena was standing at the center. I froze. Lucas and a few others were slowly walking around her, but Serena didn't look afraid. She desperately sought an exchange. "Miss Vangard," Lucas called, his voice full of worry. She She won't pass it on. I rushed forward. Serena was trembling, but she held her gaze steady. She was trying to say her full name, trying to willingly take the burden back, but her loss of control the day before prevented her. She had held it for too long, and now the burden had become too heavy to pass on by herself. "Serena, no," I said. She turned to me. "You can't find anyone. It's too heavy now. We have to do it." And I understood. It's worse if you do that. It wasn't a warning about me. It was a warning about the danger when the burden had settled too long in one person. When I tried to pass it to an outsider, I might provoke the collector, making it more aggressive. I looked into Serena's eyes, seeing the deep endurance I had carried just 2 days before. The exhaustion, the clarity of someone who could see the collector. I had no other choice. The ritual of mercy. I didn't summon the whole group, just the two of us, a small circle in the eerie silence of the empty common room. Serena stood facing me, hands clasped, eyes calm. I tried to delay, explain, beg her not to do it. But she only shook her head. "This is how it works. You know that. We all know that." The chant began. I stumbled through it, my voice fragmented by the whispers in my head. She responded as the others usually did, steady, unafraid. And then she intentionally slipped. She said her full name aloud, clearly and sharply, eyes never leaving mine. Serena Minchow. The moment the words left her mouth, I felt it. The burden vanished. The pressure in my skull, the whispers in the corners of the room, the overwhelming fear clinging to me like damp clothes. Gone. For the first time in weeks, I felt light, clear, alive. My breath came freely. My hands stopped trembling. The silence became clean. I nearly collapsed from relief. Serena gave a faint smile, but sadness never left her face. "See," she whispered, "better." My throat tightened. "You shouldn't have done that." "It's okay," she interrupted, her voice calm and steady. "We all take turns." Before I could answer, the rest of the group had gathered at the doorway, drawn by instinct. They didn't cheer or laugh. They simply surrounded her, solemn, silent, their eyes holding an understanding far too deep for their age. I looked at Serena. Her shoulders had sagged. The same burden I had carried was settling on her. I could see it in her trembling smile and the faint haze creeping into her eyes. The collector was with her now. I couldn't hear it anymore, but I knew. Guilt washed over me like a wave. I wanted to take it back, hold it forever, if it meant she wouldn't have to see what I had seen. But she only stood a little straighter, nodded once, and murmured, "Now it's lighter for everyone." The bearer of the burden. By the following week, the rhythm of Lighthouse had returned. From the window of my counseling room, I watched them form the circle, their feet brushing across the tiled courtyard, their voices rising in their strange chant. Names slipped out, laughter burst, and the burden moved. The ritual continued as it always had. But now I understood. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't bullying. It was survival. The collector was too heavy for any adolescent patient to carry forever. Passing it on wasn't malice, but the only mercy they knew. They all had learned the rule: never hold it too long, never let it root too deep. I walked among them during free activity. They scattered around me, chasing each other, trading cards. But always, in a corner of the courtyard, the circle formed. Always, the chant rose. And sometimes, I saw it go wrong. A child held it too long. Their eyes dulled. Their shoulders sagged. They stumbled during therapy, withdrew. The others urged them, circled faster, trying to force the exchange. But the child resisted, clinging to it out of fear or confusion. That's when I intervened. Their voices rose, overlapping, tricking, teasing, and I allowed myself to err. I let the words slip. My own name on my tongue, clear and deliberate, Eliza Vangard. The chant halted around me. The air seemed to shift, heavy and sharp. I felt the burden settle onto my shoulders like a familiar cloak. The patients watched, and then they continued. When the circle broke, I stayed behind, my shoulders bowing under the invisible weight. The whispers returned, my name repeating between heartbeats, settling on me once more. And for the first time, I welcomed it. Miss Eliza Vangard had accepted her role. She was the bearer of the burden, the only adult who knew the rules, the only one who could protect the children by willingly becoming the temporary sufferer of the collector. I have completed the entire story at your request, divided into 5 detailed points with the setting and character names changed. Here is your text rewritten in English exactly as given. One continuous paragraph with no added or removed words and no line breaks or bullet points. The story of Miss Eliza Vangard at the Lighthouse Psychological Rehabilitation Center is not only a supernatural horror tale, but also a profound study of endurance and sacrifice. From the strange vigilance of the clients, the muttering ritual of full names was quickly recognized as a survival defense mechanism. Every detail serves this message. The change of character names, from Mr. Hellbrook to Ms. Vangard, from Noah to Lucas and Serena, emphasizes that this burden is not personalized, but a role that is rotated. The setting of the Rehabilitation Center adds significance. These young people have already faced complex psychological struggles. The collector is merely the manifestation of the unnameable burdens they carry, the despair, the fear of family, and the loneliness. The rule, must speak the full name, is the gateway of transfer. Miss Vangard breaks the professional barrier, entering the ritual to save Lucas, but immediately faces the consequences, the murmur, and the appearance of the collector that only she can see. This is the manifestation of the burden hollowing her out. Serena's actions, having held it for long and understanding the danger, along with Miss Vangard's physical collapse, headache, trembling, sleeplessness, show that the burden is both material and spiritual, unavoidable. Feeling, fear, and mercy. The deepest feeling from this story is the blend of primal fear and ultimate compassion. The fear comes from ambiguity and helplessness. The collector is a nameless entity, impervious to reason or science, symbolizing the wordless psychological wounds they endure. Its attack only on those who bear the full name, their complete personal identity, signifies its aim at the victim's essence and existence. However, the core message is about community and sacrifice. The ritual, initially appearing cruel and frightening, turns out to be a self-preserving system. Passing the burden is not cruelty, but the only mercy ensuring that no one is entirely destroyed. Miss Eliza Vangard's final role is the pinnacle of compassion. She learns that she cannot break the rules, but she can intervene in them. Her acceptance of the role of the burden rotator, voluntarily carrying the weight to buy time and protect the young ones, transforms her from a professional into a guardian. The story ends with a painful acceptance. The burden always exists, but when shared, it becomes bearable. Miss Vangard does not escape the nightmare. She has become its pillar.